Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining me, Jennifer Woods, as I discuss the much talked about Menendez Brothers case. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so that you can follow me like some stalker character in a Lifetime movie. If following my channel was a TV movie, what would it be called? Moment of Truth, Subscribing to Terror, the Jennifer Woods story. For this episode, I will lay out the facts of the Menendez case as I've come to know them from research and talk a little bit about the two TV movies that came out in 1994 and the miniseries that came out more recently. When I saw that there was a new 2024 documentary out on Netflix called The Menendez Brothers, I was intrigued. I'd heard lots of talk about the case recently, and I didn't realize that there was also a recent Netflix miniseries about them as well. It's called Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story. It is the second season in a true crime anthology created by Ian Brennan and Ryan Murphy. I do feel that these dramatized true crime series tend to bend the truth a bit. Sometimes it's hard to know what's true and what's fake, but after watching the documentary on Netflix, and also Erik Tells All on Amazon Prime, the second season of Monsters and a couple of the 90s TV movies, I'm starting to get a better idea. I also watched a Dateline episode on the case that coincidentally aired right around the time I was talking to my parents about my thoughts on the case, and we watched it together. My dad and mom are a little more skeptical than I am. My main feeling is that they deserve time, but I think 30 to 35 years is enough considering the mitigating circumstances. I do believe they're tales of abuse. So to sum up the basic facts of the case, on August 20th, 1989 in Beverly Hills, the police were informed that Jose and Kitty Menendez were shot to death in their home. The call was made by Lyle, who was pretending to be an innocent witness. He's the older brother. Eventually, the brothers, Erik and Lyle Menendez, were arrested for the murders in March 1990. They were 18 and 21 respectively at the time of the murders. The motive was believed to be greed because they were sole inheritors of their father's wealth, and after the murders they went on a frenzied shopping spree. By the way, as we women know in the year 2024, shopping can be an excellent form of therapy, so this doesn't prove anything as far as I'm concerned. They were arrested in March 1990 at the ages of 19 and 22 when it was revealed that the brothers had confessed to the murders to Erik's psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. Erik had been the one to initially crack, and then Dr. Oziel had asked Lyle to come in as well so he could talk to them both and ultimately record the conversations. He had gotten his lover, Judalon Smith, to listen in, and she was the one who eventually came forward to the police. Erik and Lyle lawyered up, and when they went to trial, their defense was that they had been SA'd by their father starting at the age of 6. Lyle claimed he was SA'd from ages 6 to 8 and even started to act out the SA with his younger brother in the woods when he was still in elementary school, maybe 7 or 8 at the time. He felt bad about that and apologized to his brother on the stand. Erik, on the other hand, claimed that he'd been SA'd by his dad from the age of 6 up to shortly before the murders happened, when he was 18. He said that when his father told him he'd still be living at home much of the time while at college, he lost hope in escaping and snapped, and eventually confided in his older brother about what was still happening to him. His older brother confronted the father, and the father basically told him to mind his business, but he also made comments that seemed like veiled threats. The brothers soon learned that their mother knew about what was going on between father and sons the whole time and did nothing. Worried that their parents would kill them now that they'd threatened to leak the truth, they bought guns to protect themselves, but in a moment of panic, decided to kill the parents themselves. There was some question about whether they killed their mother out of mercy, or if they did so because they wanted her dead so they could get the inheritance, or if they killed her because they truly felt threatened by her. It's not surprising to me that it took them so long to come out with a whole story and the history of SA, given the deep, misplaced shame they later claimed to have felt, which fits with what we know about the victims of that kind of horror, particularly male victims, but females too. Ultimately, what the defense was going for sounds a lot like battered wife syndrome in some ways, and that has been used as a defense in other cases. But what complicates this case was that they were males, and there definitely seemed to be some bias against them because of that. There were questions of why didn't they run? reminds me of questions that were asked of Stephen Stainer when he came forward after being held captive by his abductor for 7 years. They were asked of Sean Hornbeck in 2007 after he was returned home, having endured a very similar nightmare to Stephen Stainer. Stephen was 14 when he returned home, and Sean was 15, so a bit younger than these brothers, but not little kids either. Over the years, people have come to understand a little better the traumatized minds of victims of SA, though you will hear lots of doubt from people even to this day. What I am about to discuss now is the information I got primarily from the documentary The Menendez Brothers, which came out in 2024, and also the 2017 docuseries The Menendez Murders, Erik Tells All. So it's now been over 30 years, and the brothers state in interview clips that they feel that society may be more likely to listen to the story they have to tell. Maybe because of the Me Too movement, and also the huge impact true crime documentaries seem to have on societal opinions often expressed on social media. What I learned is that it was actually a TikTok movement that got people obsessing about this case again and trying to get the brothers freed. I am not a fan of TikTok. I think it's beyond annoying. I think vigilante justice is reprehensible, and I have no interest in Kim Kardashian, so her support of Erik and Lyle would make me more likely to side against the brothers than for them. Keep all of this in mind when I say I've found myself having a lot of compassion for the brothers these past few days and feeling they were deeply wronged by the system. Some things I've learned from the documentaries I watched. Erik himself says the police should have arrested them immediately because it was obvious they were guilty. In fact, in Erik Tells All, he said that shortly after the murders, they were waiting for the police to arrive. I guess they must have thought someone would call them, having heard the gunshots, but they didn't arrive until the brothers later called them. So Erik said there was just so much evidence against them and things that they said that weren't adding up. For example, they described seeing gun smoke in the air when arriving home, but it should have cleared by the time the brothers arrived on scene, unless they actually committed the murders. But it took the police several months to finally charge them with a crime. Jose Menendez, their father, allegedly came from a wealthy family, but lost it all before coming to America, where Jose had to basically start over. Later in life, he was the head of Hertz and was responsible for O.J. Simpson appearing in the ads. I mean, that's funny now, given what ultimately became of O.J., but they wouldn't have known that back in 1990. It's also interesting, I heard in the documentaries that, specifically in Erik Tells All, that Erik actually had communications with O.J. in jail. Father Menendez was also the head of RCA Records and worked with many well-known bands and musical artists, such as a Latin pop group named Menudo. I was not familiar with Menudo outside of this case. They were before my time, apparently. I was a little kid in the 80s. Erik says in an interview clip that it was hard watching what the extended family went through after the murders. He also said he was hiding his pain during that time and was actually suicidal. Lyle also claimed to have been very unhappy at the time. The brothers blamed the mafia, but eventually the truth came out. I learned that it was after Lyle was arrested in March of 1990 and Erik was arrested while getting off a plane shortly after that the story really blew up and became huge in the media at that time. Erik's attorney was a woman named Leslie Abramson, who had short, frizzy blonde hair. She had an edge to her, and I thought she looked like some lawyer you might see in a Lifetime movie. Or maybe Tracy Gold, a well-known TV movie actress in the 90s, if for no other reason than the hair. Abramson apparently had a no fudges to give attitude, and my dad, when watching the Dateline special the other night, had some words to say about her. Just based on the impression he had of her. He knows nothing about her outside of that special, but he doesn't think that highly of lawyers, despite having been one for decades. The first trial, with 2 juries, one for each brother, occurred not long after, around the Rodney King controversy, and so there was lots of lingering tension over that case, to say the least. Jill Lansing was Lyle's attorney. The lawyers found out about the essay after hiring a defense expert named Dr. William Vickery to talk with the young men and earn their trust. From what I learned from the documentaries I watched, but not the dramatizations, the other doctor they spoke with, Dr. Oziel, was a shady guy. Erik had seen him in the past before the murders, due to some burglaries. he had committed. And after the murders, he was really struggling and ended up talking with him again. Dr. Oziel taped conversations with Erik and Lyle and had his lover, Judalon Smith, listen in on their conversations, on their confessions. There's supposed to be an expectation of confidentiality between doctor and patient, though in Erik Tells All, it was suggested that he got around that by making it sound like he was afraid for his life, that Dr. Oziel was afraid for his life. So there are dramatizations out there that show Lyle threatening him, but the impression I'm getting from some of the documentaries I watched, such as the Menendez Brothers and Erik Tells All, is that didn't happen. And so it sounds like Oziel maybe wasn't a reliable witness. His lover, Judalon Smith, had also accused him of abduction and rape, and it sounds like that was the real reason she went to the police to complain about Dr. Oziel, and just added the fact that she knew about the Menendez brothers. So if that's true, it's interesting that was left out of the dramatizations that I've seen so far. I've not watched all of Monsters. I watched part of it. I watched all of Honor Thy Father and Mother, the 1994 TV movie. And just from what I've watched so far, it sounds like they're trying to paint Dr. Oziel in a much more favorable light than he maybe should have been painted. But yeah, the claim has been made that Lyle didn't, in fact, threaten Dr. Oziel, and that maybe Dr. Oziel made that claim just to get around the patient, the doctor-patient confidentiality, from what it sounds like. There were many people who testified to Jose's cruelty, the brothers' tennis coach, for example, and Jose's own sister. The brothers have a cousin who had stories to tell that were disturbing, though he didn't actually witness the essay, but he heard and saw things that strongly implied it was going on. The brothers also have a cousin, Diane, who testified that Lyle confided in her when he was about 8 that his father was doing things that he shouldn't be doing. And she told Kitty about it, but apparently Kitty didn't do anything to stop it. Many of the family members actually spoke up in support of the brothers. Not all of them, but the fact that Kitty's own sister Joan seems to side with the brothers, as well as a few of their cousins, says to me that they are probably telling the truth. It is possible that the family members would lie for them, but keep in mind, they're also smearing their own sister, brother, aunt, uncle, in order to defend these brothers. So that's pretty telling to me. That indicates to me that they probably really do believe this. I don't find it believable that Lyle would have been able to convince all of those people to smear their own murdered family members under oath for the sake of 2 young men who confessed to committing the murders. It's possible, but doesn't seem likely. From what I've learned, there's far more evidence that they lived in mortal fear of their parents than that they were a couple of rich jerks who just wanted their inheritance. And furthermore, the amount of detail the brothers gave about the essay they experienced, the tears they shed when talking about it, the fact that Lyle even admitting to acting out his essay on his younger brother when that would not have been at all necessary for his defense, but seems consistent with a young victim of trauma, is incredibly compelling. Also, why would you confess to something like that if it wasn't necessary, and if it didn't, if it wasn't going to help you, and, if it's so incredibly shameful? I don't know why he would have confessed to that unless it was true. And the things that their father allegedly told them to keep them quiet, and the way his personality was described by others, all seems in line with this kind of predator. The mother abusing alcohol and pills also fits the narrative, and there were people to back that up about her. After the first trial, there was a deadlock amongst the jurors when it came to each brother. Pretty much the women believed the brothers, and the men didn't. So there had to be a second trial, and in the second trial, the evidence of essay was limited. And at the end of the trial, the jurors didn't have an option of imperfect self-defense, which is when a defendant has an honest fear for their life, but is perhaps misguided in that belief. So, of course, they had to find them guilty of first-degree murder. That was pretty much the only choice they had other than letting them walk. It is suggested that the judge was under pressure because of the O.J. Simpson debacle that same year in 1995, and he probably didn't want another embarrassment on his hands, so he stacked the deck against the brothers. A juror in the first trial, Hazel Thornton, wrote a book about the experience, about her experience as a juror for this trial, and it's called Hung Jury. She was a juror for the first trial. She seems to be on the brothers' side. Even though they were found guilty of first-degree murder, they were given life without parole instead of a death sentence, so that was a small mercy for them. More is revealed in the documentaries, but I won't go into every little detail and every little revelation. I will say that it was very touching to me to see how close the brothers were and how heartbroken they were to be separated when going to prison. I was glad they were reunited in 2018. I've read that their case is up in the air currently because there was a DA who was really backing them, who's been voted out in this most recent election, and there's a new DA who's going to be coming into office, and that could cause a bit of a hiccup for them, but I don't know yet what's going to happen. They do have some pretty strong new evidence. For example, a letter Erik wrote to his cousin, Andy, was found at the aunt's house, and it strongly hints at SA happening as late as December 1988, and it makes a good case for what Erik testified to in the previous trials. Andy also testified in the previous trials in support of his cousin, and that his cousin had confided in him. Andy unfortunately died in 2003. Also, a member of the boy band Menudo made allegations more recently that Jose essayed him as well back in the 80s. There is a docu-series about that on Peacock called Menendez plus Menudo. As for some thoughts I had while watching the recent documentary that are more interesting than informational. Watching clips of Tom Brokaw was extremely amusing to me because it reminds me of watching Dana Carvey on SNL. Carvey did a heck of a good impression of Brokaw on SNL. I knew immediately who he was in this documentary, even though I'm not really familiar with Brokaw outside of that SNL parody. So that was in the Menendez Brothers, a recent documentary, those clips. Also, the prosecutor from the first trial, Pamela Bozanich, she reminds me a little of Dominique Dunne for some reason. Dunne was the actress who played the older sister in the first Poltergeist, and then was murdered not long afterward by her boyfriend. Her famous father, Dominic Dunne, was very bitter about the lack of justice for his daughter, and I've read before that he actually was very vocal about the fact that he didn't believe the brothers were SA'd, and felt that they were lying in order to get off. I understand he probably was heavily biased due to his own experience trying to get justice for his daughter. It's interesting to me that the prosecutor in the original Menendez trial reminded me of Dominic Dunne's dead daughter, because I'm wondering if he noticed that too, and if it might have been another reason why he sided with the prosecution on this, but that is my pure speculation. I saw the TV movie Honor Thy Father and Mother starring James Ferrantino and Jill Clayburgh when I was probably in college, and I decided to watch that one again for this review, as well as the two-part TV movie that was made in the same year, Menendez, A Killing in Beverly Hills, notably starring Beverly D'Angelo as the mother Kitty. I can't remember what I thought about the Jill Clayburgh one when I watched it on VHS about 20 years ago. Having rewatched it, I noticed that nothing is mentioned about Judalon Smith's accusations of abduction and rape against Dr. Oziel. Maybe that would have just complicated the narrative too much and they only had an hour and a half to play with, but it did bother me that that was left out and that Dr. Oziel wasn't portrayed as a more questionable character. Though I felt the movie did take a fairly sympathetic approach to the brothers, and in the early to mid-90s, lots of TV movies were made about women, especially killing their husbands or fathers in questionable self-defense after years of abuse, so it makes sense they would take that approach here and believe the brothers' claims about SA. I was impressed with James Ferrantino as the father and Jill Clayburgh as the mother. The actors who played the brothers didn't really have much of an emotional impact on me, and I just got this feeling from them that their acting was a little bit shallow. Others might disagree, but that's how I felt. And I just didn't like the fact that they put out these two movies in 1994 before the second trial. So they missed the whole second half of the case because they were in a rush to get this out. And as a result, the two movies probably were sloppily put together. As for Menendez, A Killing in Beverly Hills, that was a more in-depth look, being a two-part TV movie. It starred Beverly D'Angelo as the mother, and she did a great job. The movie goes into a lot of backstory as opposed to centering on just the crime and aftermath itself, and I don't really think that was an effective way of telling the story. I don't think anyone can really know the nuances of living in that household other than the two brothers and the mother and father they killed, so it's obviously going to be very biased and probably based on a lot of testimony and speculation by outsiders. I think centering the movie on the crime, which is what Honor Thy Father and Mother did, was a better way to go about it. Though it may have created a more shallow view of the story. Personally, I much prefer the documentaries now that we have them available to us, and feel this is the only way these stories should be told going forward. Now that brings us to Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, which does seem to be a bit sensationalized, to say the least. I get the impression that Lyle in this series was made out to be more of a tough a-hole than he maybe actually was. I did get the impression from the 2024 documentary that Lyle had a tougher personality than his younger brother, but he just seemed so over the top in the miniseries, and I don't know if I can believe it, though I think the actor did a great job. He looks like Jonathan Brandis, in my opinion. The miniseries implies that the brothers had an inappropriate relationship, if you know what I mean, and it did seem like they homoeroticized their relationship quite a bit. That's probably Hollywood for you. It is also true that Lyle did confess to doing inappropriate things with his younger brother when they were kids, but that was when he was about 8, and that's mentioned in the miniseries, but it seemed to be treated as less of an aside in the miniseries than it was in the documentary. And more of a bigger point of discussion amongst the defendants and their lawyers. But then the miniseries did have to dramatize it and fully flesh out the story in a way that the documentary did not. I went into the miniseries expecting it to be someone's fantasy of what might have gone on behind the scenes as opposed to the true story from the horse's mouth, and that's how I tend to approach any movie or miniseries based on a true crime. Honestly, they probably should have made a fictional miniseries that was merely inspired by the case as opposed to based on it. From what I've read online, Erik was very bothered by the way the miniseries was handled. I don't know if he actually watched it or if he was going off things he was told, but I can imagine that the homoerotic scenes with the brothers would have been very upsetting to the real brothers and to their family, especially since it doesn't seem to be based on facts of any kind, but mere speculation and fantasy. And by the way, from what I've watched of the miniseries, like the first 2 episodes and like kind of skimmed through the second 2, and what I've read up on it, it sounds like the implied relationship between the 2 brothers is more coy than anything. They have a kiss in the second episode. It's not much of a kiss. It's like a little more than a peck. And it's just a lot of implied homoeroticism between the 2 of them. And in addition to me thinking that it's disrespectful to the real people, it just feels really coy, and that kind of annoys me as well. Like, if you're going to come out and say this, be upfront about it. Don't kind of flirt with the idea, and make it fictional. Don't say this about real people where there's no evidence that what you're saying is true. I felt guilty watching the miniseries and decided I would go into it thinking that this is not Lyle and Erik's story. This is a story someone else came up with after hearing about the Lyle and Erik story. It has facts from their case and theories that have been tossed around, but if you want to know the truth, there are many documentaries and books out there that might appeal to you. It might be a good idea to watch or read a few of them if you're really that interested in learning everything you can about the case. I will include these titles in the video description. If you do watch the miniseries, it might help you better visualize some of the facts you read. The good news is that people seem to be paying more attention to the brothers lately, and that might work in their favor. I think 30 to 35 years in prison is long enough for them personally. I think they appreciate the seriousness of what they did, and I understand how they might have felt trapped. I see this as 2 young men who felt they had few options available to them and chose a path of heartbreak in their attempts to break out of the prison that was their home life. That's my impression at least. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, please.